So I was at a local tournament last week playing Emerald Sapphire, and one of my opponents who was on Purple Steel said to me, I don't get a lot of practice playing against Emerald Sapphire. To which I said, yeah, in Singapore it's a deck that seems to be slightly underplayed because it's, slightly inconsistent. And then he responded, no, it's because it's just too technical. So that got my content creator juices flowing, and I thought, that's a pretty good reason to do an improving technical play episode. So in this video, we are going to review the finals of the Wakefield CCQ between James Burton playing Emerald Sapphire and David Fairweather playing Sapphire-Steel. The finals was a best of 3 that ended in 2 games, so we're going to look at both games this video.
Hooray!
Both the games were actually fairly interesting as the players, in particular David Fairweather, made very creative and committal plays that exhibited his understanding of the matchup, so this should be a good watch. From the outset, I do apologize for the document was last saved thing that's on top of the screen. I didn't notice it when I was screen recording and I don't know how to remove it, and when I went back to the Disney Locana EU official channel, it turns out that this video was gone. So unfortunately, you're going to have to live with it for the rest of this video. But enough of my technical incompetence, let's first talk about the Sapphire-Emerald deck played by James Burton. Like all Sapphire decks, this deck plans to ramp on turn 2 with Tipo, Sail and 1 jump ahead, and occasionally additionally later with Cinderella, and then subsequently just play big stuff. However, unlike Blurple or Sapphire-Steel, the big stuff that this deck plays essentially functions like a combo deck. There are effectively 2 sets of combos. The first is a Clarabelle, and playing or singing songs or play other characters that bounce stuff back to the opponent's hand so that you can draw additional cards from Clarabelle's effect based on the cards that you bounce back to their hand. The second combo is the vaunted Malicious Mean and Scary Prince Phillip combo, which essentially wipes out the opponent's board when both are played. In order to enable both combos to be played early in the game, the deck also plays a bunch of shift targets for Prince Phillip and Clarabelle. So those cards are essentially the bones of the deck, and the rest of it is quite customizable depending on the player. In James's case, he goes for a full 4 of Cinderella, which is not the ubiquitous option across everybody's Sapphire-Emerald lists, and he's also only playing 2 John Silver, likely to make space for the 2 Mother Knows Bests that he has in addition to the 2 Under the Seas. He's also playing a 1-off Bend to My Will. In general, this is a fairly difficult deck to pilot as it is not the most consistent and can sometimes struggle if you are unable to land a timely Clarabelle. However, when it pops off, it really well and truly feels like your opponent cannot do anything. On the other hand, David Fairweather is playing a Sapphire-Steel Ramp list, and the game plan is fairly obvious. Ramp on the early turns of the game and get to your expensive high end where your characters are all massive and are generally able to kill something on play. You also have some hand disruption in the form of Headless Horseman, Goliath and Beyond the Horizons, and the latter 2 also function as a form of card advantage to draw more big things to play. It's simple and straightforward, though being able to sequence your inking correctly plays a massive part in whether you are able to successfully pilot this deck. I personally played this matchup a lot from the Emerald Sapphire side, so here's just some general thoughts. Bit of value add. Firstly, whoever goes first is extremely advantaged because it is a ramp mirror, maybe upwards of 20-30 percentage points. Secondly, because Sapphire-Steel is actually quite good at shedding its hand so that it only has 2 or 3 cards but, 7, 8, 9, 10 ink, Clarabelle doesn't draw that many cards for the Emerald Sapphire player. What this means is that the game will eventually almost always devolve into a top decking war. It's almost like gladiatorial combat. I play a Clarabelle, draw no cards, pass. Blue Steel player draws, oh, it's a Hades, I'll Hades your Clarabelle. Sapphire-Emerald player draws, oh, it's a Hades, I'll Hades your Hades. And then the other guy draws, oh, it's Headless Horseman, or Headless Horseman, pray and hope I hit to kill your Hades, so on and so forth. Eventually, whoever can stick more large characters wins. On that front, Sapphire-Steel has more large threats than Sapphire-Emerald and generally plays less air, small useless cards in their deck, so their top deck quality tends to be better. However, the Malicious Mean and Scary Prince Phillip combo is the be-all and end-all in the matchup. If you can land it as the Sapphire-Emerald player on a decently sized board from the Saph-Steel player, like say 2 or 3 characters, because they only have 2 cards in hand most of the time, you're likely in a very good position to win the game from there. On the other hand, the MMS Prince Phillip combo tends to take some setting up, you hold those cards in your hand, and before you get to do it, typically the Saph-Steel player has counterplay through the form of hand disruption that I mentioned earlier, Beyond the Horizons, early Goliath or Headless Horseman. In my opinion, the matchup is 60-40 in favor of the Sapphire-Emerald player, though I could be biased because I like the deck. But Ultimately comes down to who goes first, who goes second, top deck quality, and also obviously player strength. On that note, enough yapping from me, let's turn and review the game between James Burton and David Fairweather. At the start of the game, we have the altar. Unfortunately, we can't see much of both players' hands. We can see that David Fairweather dumps 2 cards, including a repeat Cinderella, and he draws into a Goliath and a Spooky Sight, which is pretty useless. But during the flash of his hand over there, we did see that he kept a 1 jump ahead, so he does have the ramp. On the other hand, if you've been noticing, James Burton, he just looked at his 7, threw the 7 away, so we know he didn't have turn 2 ramp, and let's hope he finds it. So David goes first. He inks a Goliath, plays a Mulan, draws a card, and discards that pretty useless in this matchup Spooky Sight. All good from him. On Burton's turn, we actually managed to get a pretty good look at his hand, which is Clarabelle, Clumsy Guess, You're Welcome, Donald Duck, Perfect Gentleman, Big Bouncy Basil, Tipo, Prince Phillip, 9-drop, Sail the Azurite Sea, and Mother Knows Best. He decides to ink his Phillip and play his Clarabelle, Clumsy Guest. I don't really agree with inking Prince Phillip 9 here. I think that card is just too important in this matchup, and if over the next 2 draws he manages to find a Prince Phillip 3-drop, he could on turn 2 play Tipo, turn 3 play Sail, ink a bunch of cards, develop the Prince Phillip 3, and he's basically set up the combo already and awaiting Malicious Mean and Scary to enter his hand. Even if he never draws Malicious Mean and Scary in the meantime, he still has the Clarabelle, Clumsy Guess that he's played, as well as the Tipo, in order to bash into David's characters such that the shift up into Phillip 9 would be able to kill something large. I would actually rather ink the Basil instead. Even though it's a fairly strong 7-drop, the matchup against Blue Steel is actually one of his worst matchups because a lot of Blue Steel's cards are not things that you want to bounce back to the hand. You know, Hades Inferno Schemer, Headless Horseman, so sometimes Basil can be awkward. As for the decision to play Clarabelle, it's not often played on turn 1 in Emerald Sapphire decks with Cinderella because you tend to save it for the turn after you've played the Cinderella. You'll be up to 6 ink and then you can play Clarabelle 1 and shift immediately into Clarabelle 7. And that prevents your shift line from being disrupted. But seeing as he doesn't have the Cinderella in hand and his 4-drop will likely be Donald Duck, I think playing the Clarabelle is fine. So that's 1.5 minutes for the first turn of the game. I never said this was going to be a short video. On David Fairweather's turn, he inks a Mulan, plays the 1 jump ahead, adds an extra ink, setting himself up nicely to play Cinderella next turn. He's also in a great position therefore to play Goliath on the turn after the Cinderella, which would be very damaging for James Burton because he has to discard all the cards in his hand, and shifting up to Clarabelle won't save him because David also doesn't have that many cards in his hand. David quests with his Mulan and passes. On Burton's turn, he draws and inks the Phillip 3, see what did I tell you? And then he plays a Tipo, puts an unseen card into his inkwell and passes back. On David's turn, he inks the Sail the Azurite Sea, plays the Cinderella as we discussed, decides to quest with his Mulan, which is a nice and safe quest, and ends his turn by triggering Cinderella's effect, putting a card from his hand into his inkwell and drawing a card. On Burton's turn, he inks a Sail the Azurite Sea, plays his Donald Duck Gentleman from his hand, takes the trade for the Mulan with his Tipo, and passes the turn. Good turn. Or it would have been a good turn if not for David inking his Sail and playing the Goliath with only 2 cards left in his hand and passing the turn back to James Burton. James starts the turn with 4 cards in his hand, so he has to find a way to answer the Goliath, if not he has to discard. He decides to draw an extra with Donald Duck to try and find the answer. Keep in mind that at the start of the game, he had a Mother Knows Best in his hand, which he would obviously play here if he still had it, but he doesn't play it, which clearly means that he had put it into his inkwell earlier with Tipo. That also means that he's still holding on to the Basil 7, which on this turn doesn't help him at all. He only can go up to 5 ink. So given this, I think holding on to Basil 7 for that long was a mistake. Of course, all this could be saved if he had managed to draw by this point into the Clarabelle 7. He could shift up into Clarabelle 7 this turn, sing the You're Welcome that's in his hand, which would put him quite far ahead. But as we see, he doesn't draw it. He inks a Clarabelle 1 and unfortunately has to hard cast a You're Welcome on the Goliath, which gives David Fairweather 2 more cards. I think this is clearly a disastrous turn for him. It may have been avoidable if he didn't throw away the Mother Knows Best and play a bit more conservatively. I think he just over-indexed on drawing Clarabelle 7 in time and being able to use You're Welcome in a timely fashion and didn't try and have his hand set up for a situation where that doesn't happen. And with that, Burton passes his turn. On Fairweather's turn, he's now in a very strong position to just start playing massive cards and force James Burton to deal with them. He plays a Mulan, draws and discards a useless spooky sight. He inks a Tipo, good ink, useless card at this point, and he uses the rest of his ink to play another Goliath for James Burton to answer. Unfortunately, he has 3 cards in hand, so he's forced to discard the Goliath's effect. He sequences his end of turn effects correctly by first triggering Cinderella because of Mulan coming in, puts a card into ink, draws a card, and then he decides what to discard to Goliath, and he decides to discard a Namari. It's not clear what other big 6 drop that David Fairweather could have played on his turn, but I think regardless, Goliath was a great choice because it really restricts what James Burton can do. For example, shifting into Clarabelle here would not be that great without a You're Welcome, and he's already used a You're Welcome. So I think that David Fairweather, having correctly identified that the biggest threat right now is a Clarabelle, is willing to throw away a card from his hand, a Namari, in order to play a Goliath to restrict the effectiveness of the Clarabelle, which is honestly a great play on his part. Burton's turn, he draws with the Donald Duck, he draws for his turn as well. It looks like the best that he can do is to ink a Prince Phillip 9 and play a John Silver from his hand. He chooses Goliath for Reckless, and because he has 3 cards in hand, he has to discard 1. He discards the Under the Sea, which while decent on this board is generally not amazing in this matchup, so all good. Inking Phillip 9 here again to me seems slightly questionable, but I don't know what cards he's holding on to. Probably the Basil and something else, and the Basil might be pretty good next turn, so I'll refrain from criticizing too much. David's turn, he makes what I think is the first mistake of the game for him. He decides to play an Ink Runner with 2 ink, draws a card, and then strangely enough then goes on to ink a Headless Horseman, which as mentioned earlier is one of his best cards in the matchup, but he inks it so that he can play a 7-drop, which is the one-off Arthur in his deck. He puts Arthur's effect onto Goliath, and then he uses it to challenge the ready Donald Duck for free because of the resist 2 granted by Arthur. All in all, this is a good choice. I think taking out Donald Duck is better than taking out John Silver because John Silver is essentially just a 5/5. Donald Duck lets James Burton draws more cards to maybe get back into the game with his MMS Prince Phillip combo. He also decides to steal a bit of lore by questing with the Mulan, but decides not to quest with the Cinderella. Anyway, going back to what I said was a mistake earlier, I think he probably just shouldn't have played the Ink Runner. It doesn't have that many great evasive targets to benefit off of in James Burton's deck. The only card is pretty much Prince Phillip 9, and even then, most of your characters, barring Goliath, are too small to take out Prince Phillip 9 one-on-one in a challenge anyway. So instead of playing the Ink Runner to try and draw a card and find something else to ink other than Headless Horseman, he could just ink the Ink Runner, saving the Headless Horseman in hand. Oh well, anyway, it doesn't matter, he's completely crushing this board anyway. So on James Burton's turn, he inks the Basil that he's been holding forever to play another 7-drop, the Hades, to remove the Arthur. He takes the trade into the Mulan of his Clarabelle. At this point, good choice since he can just hard cast Clarabelle 7 anyway, and he quests with his John Silver, giving Goliath Reckless, which is great because he only has 1 card in hand. He leaves Goliath available on board so that he can draw an extra card at the end of his turn while still forcing David Fairweather to bash his Goliath into the John Silver on the following turn. That's also probably why he didn't play the Hades onto the Goliath but instead onto the Arthur. He's saying, I'm going to try and take advantage of your Goliath to draw cards for myself, which can be a thing that works out for you in this matchup, but of course comes with its risks. Overall, I think this is a fine play. So now on David's turn, we are entering the gladiatorial portion of the game. He plays his Vincenzo to deal 3 damage to the John Silver and kills it off with his Cinderella. For a bit of comedy, he decides to spend an ink to activate his Ink Runner to give his Gargoyle alert, which doesn't do anything. Then he passes his turn because his Goliath cannot quest because of the John Silver Reckless earlier. On Burton's turn, he inks a Tipo and gets to play a value hard cast Under the Sea to remove the Vincenzo, which is one of the few applications that it has that's pretty good in this matchup. All good, he ends his turn, draws a card due to Goliath's effect, and hands the turn over back to David. David's turn, he would really like to play something large, like the Headless Horseman that he inked earlier, but it looks like he didn't draw into them, so he just plays 2 Cinderellas, which gives him 2 triggers with 1 card in hand. He also sinks he hurled his Thunderbolt with his Goliath to deal 4 damage to Hades, so he has no cards left, allowing him to trigger Goliath first, draw 2, and then giving him 2 Cindy activations should he need them. Goliath singing he hurled his Thunderbolt there was effectively cycling it away for a fresh card off the top because of Goliath's effect, which is a good thing to do because He Hurled His Thunderbolt doesn't do much on this board, so good play. On Burton's turn, he does something extremely bizarre. He inks his Clarabelle 1, which is fine, but he plays a hard cast You're Welcome onto a Cinderella. Presumably, he thinks because Goliath is on the board and will continue to stay alive, giving David 2 more cards here doesn't do much. But it still allows David to go 2 cards deeper in his deck to try and find some more massive stuff to play like Hades or Headless Horseman. Not only that, he then goes on to play another You're Welcome on the other Cinderella, doubling down on this Goliath to basically get rid of all the card advantage that he's giving David. I don't know, to me this looks pretty horrible. The obvious play here would be to play one of the 2 You're Welcomes onto his Hades by singing with the Hades, targeting itself, it shuffles itself back into the deck, you draw 2 cards. Seeing as the Hades doesn't do much on this board, it dies to either of the Cinderellas trading in, and this way you still have 7 ink, you can draw into a Basil, you can draw into a Hades. There are many more good cards you can draw and play here. If we evaluate Burton's board state, we can see he's really not that far behind. All he needs is to play one big thing, which playing You're Welcome on your Hades gives you the opportunity to do on this very turn. And if he doesn't manage to find them, well, he can still play the other You're Welcome in his hand onto the Cinderella or something. With the line that he took, I guess he gets to draw 2 cards with Goliath at the end of his turn since he got rid of all the cards in his hand. But notwithstanding the Goliath in play, you've still given David Fairweather every opportunity to play a big thing next turn and hold 2 more in his hand, which loads him up with plenty of gas such that he's likely to win the game in the next 3 to 4 turns. I don't know, to me it just looks like a play made out of frustration because of how badly the game is going and also because of how badly he's been drawing, but there were still better options to be taken there. On the upside, I guess he gets to quest for 2 with Hades here, which is good because the Goliath cannot challenge it back because it cannot unexert on his turn because David has like, what, 6 cards in his hand? So yeah, at least he gets to keep his damage Hades. So on David's turn, after drawing 1 more for turn, he has 6 trillion cards in his hand, which allows him to make this awesome play. So he inks a Goliath, he plays a Vincenzo, dealing the 3 damage to the Goliath, and then he spends 4 ink to Thunderbolt away the Goliath, allowing him to keep all the extra gas that he drew. What a perfect turn from him. So now David Fairweather is in the driving seat to win the game, because of all the extra resources, unless James Burton draws the exact card that he needed in this precise situation, which by the way he does. And I'm not pausing the video here just for massive dramatic effect. He draws the Clarabelle 7. Alright, let's not waste time. Just pass the turn, fill back up your hand, and suddenly he is right back in this game because of the top deck. To be clear, I don't think that justifies his play for the previous turn, but you do have to say that it really worked out. Clarabelle, best card in the game. This is why I love Emerald Sapphire. On David Fairweather's turn, time to go back into gladiatorial combat. He inks a Namari, he plays a Hades Infernal Schemer to take out the Clarabelle, and after spending some time in the tank, he decides to spend the remainder of his 7 ink to play the Vincenzo that's in his hand to take out the Hades. He quests for 3 with his Vincenzo, he is now back firmly in the driver's seat. On James Burton's turn, he plays a Phillip 3, a decent play to set up the Prince Phillip combo on the subsequent turn should he be able to draw into it, and he plays a Basil. But seeing as there are kind of no good targets to bounce, he doesn't choose anything and instead decides to pass the turn. Here he could have chose one of the Vincenzos just to remove the law pressure for at least a turn, but I know either way I think it's fine. Fairweather's turn, he decides to take the casino out for a spin by playing the Headless Horseman. They both draw 3 cards, discard 3 cards. So Burton discards a Cinderella, a Prince Phillip, ouch, and the Sail the Azurite Sea. Fairweather did his discard earlier, but he did it off screen, so it's not clear exactly what he discarded. But in any event, there was enough damage to take out the only target that he had, which was the Basil. Following that, he plays a Develop Your Brain, seeing what I think is a Vision of the Future and a Thunderbolt. He throws away the Thunderbolt, keeping the Vision of the Future. He then plays the Vision of the Future, gets to see the top 5 cards of his deck, and then he quests for 8 here, which puts him in a position to be threatening lethal next turn. On James Burton's turn, we can see why he didn't bounce anything with the Basil last turn, because he has the Prince Phillip combo. He sinks Malicious Mean and Scary with Prince Phillip, and he plays the larger Prince Phillip, which illuminates all of the work that David Fairweather did over the past 3 or 4 turns of the game. However, as James Burton had inked 2 Prince Phillips earlier and discarded 1 to the Headless Horseman, this is pretty much the last one, so he'd better make it count. David's turn, the gladiatorial combat continues. He plays a Hades to remove the Prince Phillip 9, and he plays a Tinkerbell just to add some more law pressure to the board. Back over to James Burton's turn, we can see he's looking at a hand of Basil, Clarabelle 7 and Cinderella, none of which really do anything on this board. He decides to play the Basil, bouncing the Tinkerbell to relieve the law pressure, knowing that the Prince Phillip 3 is likely to die next turn to the Tinkerbell coming back down, so he quests with it. He then also plays the Cinderella and smartly decides to throw away the Clarabelle because at this point that card is not particularly useful, seeing as both players are top decking. From here, the way that he wins the game is to basically draw all 3 of his remaining Hades left in deck, seeing as he has no more Prince Phillip left to play. On David's turn, we can see that his hand is Vision, Namari and Tinkerbell. He plays the Vision of the Future, looks at the top 5 cards, and he sees this spread, which is not very great. He decides to take the Thunderbolt because it answers the Basil that's currently on the board clean. Then, as promised, he replays the Tinkerbell, which kills off the Prince Phillip 3. He also plays his Namari. He then sings the Thunderbolt with his Hades to take out the Basil as forecasted. And seeing as he can't quest, he passes his turn, once again presenting lethal. On Burton's turn, he opens with a Vision of the Future. He sees this spread, a Bend to My Will, 2 Sail the Azurite Seas, a Clarabelle Clumsy Guess and a Vision of the Future, all nothing burgers. He decides to take and play the Vision of the Future and sees this spread, which is better because of the Basil, but unfortunately doesn't have a Hades. He takes and plays the Basil, bouncing the Namari, delaying the lethal for at least 1 more turn. And now there's nothing else to be done, so he passes his turn. If he doesn't draw at least a series of Hades in a row, he's going to lose. On David Fairweather's turn, he plays a Vision of the Future and he sees this spread, which is also a whole bunch of nothing burgers. He takes a Develop Your Brain and plays it. He replays the Namari, plays another Thunderbolt from his hand to kill the Basil, and quests with his Tinkerbell and Hades, putting him up to 18 lore. On Burton's turn, facing down this extremely lethal board, the best thing that he can do is to sing You're Welcome with his Cinderella targeting itself to see what's on the top 2 cards of his deck. He draws 2, shows 2 T-pose and concedes. He also shows he has a Malicious, Mean and Scary in his hand, as if signaling, I'm trying to draw the Prince Phillip, but as we know, he's already lost all 4 of them, so there was no chance that was going to happen. And with that, David Fairweather takes Game 1. Wow, that was an exciting Game 1, huh? Well, we're going to go on to Game 2 as promised, and after that we'll talk about the learning points from both games. But before we go on to that, I would just like to say that if you do like and enjoy this type of content, then please like and subscribe to our channel Quest for 2, it would really help us out a lot. Alright, done with this commercial break, let's go on to Game 2. We'll start Game 2 after the altars because we didn't get a good view of both of them, save that both players kept at least 1 card, so we know that they have ramp on turn 2. James Burton leads with inking Donald Duck on turn 1, and Fairweather inks Vincenzo and passes. On Burton's turn, he inks a Clarabelle, suggesting he has another one in hand, plays a Sail the Azurite Sea, following which we get a great view of his hand. A Prince Phillip 9, 2 Cinderella, Clarabelle 7 as mentioned, You're Welcome, and Malicious, Mean and Scary. He decides to ink the Malicious, Mean and Scary, which looks like the correct choice. Since you want to keep the other non-Phillip cards for a Clarabelle play on 7 ink, and between Prince Phillip 9 and Malicious, Mean and Scary is the more replaceable effect. On Fairweather's turn, he inks a Tipo, plays a Sail, inks a Goliath, and passes. On Burton's turn, he inks a Clarabelle 1 that he drew for turn, plays a Cinderella, and triggers Cinderella's effect. Inking Clarabelle 1 is fine there because clearly he intends to play Cinderella on this turn, Cinderella on the next turn, which will get him to enough ink to play Clarabelle on the following turn and 2 possible bodies that can sing You're Welcome. So he doesn't need the shift. On Fairweather's turn, he inks a Namari and follows up with Akida Creative Thinker and passes the turn back to James. On Burton's turn, he inks Basil 7, plays the other Cinderella as we discussed, and triggers both of them, which would leave him starting next turn with 7 ink and 2 bodies to sing You're Welcome. A great spot to be. Before resolving the second Cinderella trigger, we can see his hand is Vision of the Future, You're Welcome and Clarabelle 7. After some agonizing, he decides to dump the Vision of the Future to the Cinderella effect, drawing an unseen card. But in any event, it just looks like a well-played turn by Burton. On Fairweather's turn, he inks a Tinkerbell and plays a Cinderella that likely came 1 turn too late, and he uses his Kida to sing a Thunderbolt to remove a Cinderella, and he ends his turn triggering his own Cinderella. The choice to use Kida to sing Thunderbolt rather than triggering its effect to add another card to his Inkwell is pretty interesting, but I think he sees the threat of Clarabelle 7 coming down next turn and is just dumping 1 more card from his hand. All good from him. On Burton's turn, he makes the classic play of playing Clarabelle 7 and using his Cinderella to sing a You're Welcome on the only legal target from Fairweather, his Cinderella. After the You're Welcome, he passes his turn and it turns out he gets to draw 3 more cards because David Fairweather has 5 cards in hand. So he's in the driving seat currently to win the game, James Burton is. On Fairweather's turn, we can see what he's working with: a Vincenzo, Beyond the Horizon, Namari, 2 Goliath, and a Develop Your Brain. He takes a long time to decide what to do, rightfully so, because none of the cards answer the Clarabelle board, And none of them are even that great to play, because whatever he plays, Large Sting, Goliath or Vincenzo or Namari, they're likely to get either Basil or Hades by Burton the following turn. If that happens, then the game slips away from him essentially. So instead of playing a character, he opts for the coolest line ever. He inks a Goliath and just plays a Beyond the Horizons with both players discarding 3 cards. We can see from Burton's discarded hand that he does have the 2 Hades, which makes this an incredibly prescient play. I think David Fairweather noticed that James Burton didn't ink a card last turn, notwithstanding he had Clarabelle on board, which meant that, his hand is stocked up with goodies or maybe uninkables like Hades. So not only does he remove those cards, he also draws 3, which gives him a chance to find the answer to the Clarabelle on board. Just genius from David Fairweather. Wraps up the turn by using his Kida to challenge away the Cinderella. Going back to the Beyond the Horizons play, I cannot stress just how genius that was. A big part of what makes it such a genius play is that it's so committal. He goes down in cards in hand from 6 to 3, he hard casts it, which leaves him with no ink to play any other characters, which then gives James Burton full control of the board the following turn should he play a character. But I think he recognized that the hand disruption on James Burton is very valuable, and trying to find a way to remove that Clarabelle is also very important, which is why he just went for it. Honestly, it's very brave. I'm not sure most of us watching from home would be able to have the guts to do something like that, but I guess that's the kind of guts that you need in order to win a tournament. But does he win the tournament? Well, let's wait and see. Back to James Burton's turn. He plays a Vision of the Future, looks at the top 5, picks one and puts it into his hand. And after the vision, we look at his hand and we can see it just got nuked into oblivion by the Beyond the Horizon. It's made out of T-pose, one jump ahead, and a malicious, mean and scary. Thankfully, he still has the John Silver, which he's able to play on this turn after inking the T-po. And then he takes the trade with his Clarabelle into the Kida, which is a fine play. And with that, he draws one more card at the end of the turn using Clarabelle's effect and passes the turn. With that turn, he's still in a good position, but not as good as it would have been had he been able to keep his hand. Man, that Beyond the Horizons. Back to David Fairweather, he inks a Sail the Azurite Sea and ding 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 ding, it's casino time with the Headless Horseman. After going through all the rigmarole, we see what both players discarded and dang, that looks like 0 damage. Unfortunate. What can you do? The game goes on, he passes his turn. On James Burton's turn, after leading with a Sail the Azurite Sea, exerts all of his ink and plays a Clarabelle 7. He then makes the decision to ink the remainder of his hand, which is a Basil 7 and another Clarabelle 7, to play one jump ahead to add an ink into Inkwell. That will put him in 0 cards in hand, which allows him to draw, I believe, 2 additional cards off of Clarabelle's effect. And he then quests out for 4 additional lore. In hindsight, I'm not sure inking basically his whole hand there was great. In this matchup, often the quality of cards matters more than the quantity, and Basil and Clarabelle 7, while not the best in this matchup, are still above average draws that he can hit compared to other stuff like Tipo or Sails and so on and so forth. Further, since he has the board lead, if he just plays big stuff, then it's up to David Fairweather to answer them. Seeing as we know from the previous turn that he had the one jump ahead in hand, I'm going to assume that what he drew off the Sail the Azurite Sea was likely the Basil or the Clara 7, in which case I think the better line might have been to ink the Sail, hold whichever one of the 7 drops he has in his hand, and decide to only draw 1 card off of his Clarabelle on board's effect. Sure, you draw 1 less card, but why do you need to draw more cards when the cards in your hand are already good, right? Back to David Fairweather, he leads with a Develop Your Brain, sees a Hades and a Vincenzo on the top of his deck. Very, very lovely. He decides to take the Hades, inks a Tipo, plays Hades taking out the ready Clarabelle, and uses his Headless Horseman to take out the other exerted Clarabelle. Great turn, great play. Taking out Clarabelle's is better than taking out the John Silver, since John Silver is really just a 5/5. Back over to Burton, he takes forever for his turn because he basically has nothing to do and he's just agonizing over how badly he's drawn. He plays a Tipo, plays a Clarabelle 1, and decides to pass rather than do anything with the silver. I think he's basically setting up to try and draw a Prince Phillip 9 here, so all in all, not that bad a turn from him, seeing as he's not really facing law pressure. Back to David Fairweather's turn, we go back to the casino again with another Headless Horseman. And when doing the discard reviews, it shows that James Burton discards a You're Welcome, a Vision of the Future, and a Under the Sea, which is straight up just 6 damage. Which, regardless of how many David Fairweather discarded or what he discarded, that's more than enough damage to take out the John Silver, which he does. He then quests with his characters and passes the turn. He has an amazing board lead. Over to James Burton's turn, he plays a Basil and decides to bounce the Headless Horseman, which is not great, but maybe that's kind of the best he can do. He throws in his 2 little critters to kill off the damaged Headless Horseman, and then agonizes for a long time before deciding to play the Malicious, Mean and Scary, which just puts 1 damage on the Hades. He's obviously doing this to play around the Hitless Horseman that will come down next turn, but of course it goes without saying he probably should have played that first, because then that would let him keep like a Clarabelle 1 on board rather than throwing both away. But honestly, who cares about strategy? On David Fairweather's turn, it's back to the casino again with a Hitless Horseman. After going through their discards on both sides, we can see that there is enough damage to take out the Basil, but critically James Burton discards his Malicious, Mean and Scary and Prince Phillip combo, which is slightly unfortunate. Subsequently, Fairweather plays a Develop Your Brain, sees a Vincenzo and another card and takes the Vincenzo, and he quests with his Hades to add 2 more lore to his game, leaving James Burton with no characters on board. Burton has no cards in hand, so he draws and just plays a Donald Duck that he drew. Over to Fairweather, he plays a Sail the Azurite Sea, inks a Tipo, the Vincenzo to deal 3 damage to the Donald Duck and add some lore pressure to the board, and then he proceeds to quest out with his characters. Back to Burton, he draws 2 cards off of the Donald Duck and his natural draw step for the turn. He plays a Vision of the Future and sees this spread, which is unfortunately extremely unexciting. He decides to take the You're Welcome, plays his other card from hand, the Prince Phillip 3, and passes the turn. Back over to David Fairweather, he plays a Cinderella, quests out with his characters for 7, which puts him in a position to threaten lethal with multiple characters next turn. He then uses the rest of his ink to play another quester, the one-off Pluto, just to add another lore threat to the board, and he triggers his Cinderella and passes. At this point, the only thing that can save James Burton here is the MMS Prince Phillip combo, which he tries to draw. We get to look at his hand and unfortunately he doesn't have it. So what does he do? He sinks You're Welcome with the Donald Duck targeting itself back into the deck to get another chance to look at 2 more cards. And while he does draw into the Hades, which by the way I believe is his last copy left, that's not enough to save him on this board. He then decides to count out 7 ink and I believe as just a parting gift, plays the Bend to My Will to discard David Fairweather's hand. He inks the Clarabelle and plays the Hades, eventually choosing the Pluto, and then he passes the turn. On David Fairweather's turn, he decides to quest out with his characters 1 by 1 just for probably maximum dramatic effect. And then he decides to play a fool with his Hitless Horseman, show it to the camera, turn it sideways, and there we have it. David Fairweather takes game 2 as well, and he is the champion of this CCQ. So there we have it. Emerald Sapphire matchup against Blue Steel, with Blue Steel being the winner. It's been a long video, so if you're still watching, thanks very much for your dedication and your patience. And without going too deep into the clips to dig up examples, I'll give you 2 quick takeaways that we can learn from the games that we saw today. The first takeaway is that what cards you ink, especially in the early turns, are extremely critical. More specifically, it's a common habit for us to ink expensive cards on the early turns like 1 and 2, expensive cards like Prince Phillip, but where we know that the cards are extremely important in the matchup, sometimes it might be better to think twice before doing so. If this is a part of your game that you struggle with, I would encourage you to do a little thought exercise when you're playing your next few games of Arcana with such decks. You treat these cards that are important in the matchup as uninkable, so you never ink them. And we see how that affects the play and how the games play out compared to when you did ink them maybe a bit too frequently. From there, you can kind of scale back the inking, but generally lean towards the side of not inking them first and see where we can adjust from there. Another common gameplay mistake which showed itself in those games earlier is playing cards that let you draw a card, so cycling just 1 card forward. For example, Ink Runner, or in later turns Sail the Azurite Sea. Instead of just playing them, you could just ink them. Sure, you might end up drawing into something good, but if your hand is also already very good and you're very likely to ink what you draw off the card that gave you the draw effect, then you might be better off just inking the card that gave you the draw effect. The second takeaway from those games is learning how to play around your opponent's cards. More specifically, playing around Clarabelle. In the games, we saw how David Fairweather very successfully completely curbed the effect that Clarabelle would have on the game as much as he could. In game 1, he played the early Goliath, discarding a card from his hand to the Goliath just to have that happen and deprive the Clarabelle of doing anything. In game 2, we had that amazing Beyond the Horizon play, which also severely limited what Clarabelle could do on the board. Because of those very committal but ultimately what looks like genius and correct decisions, and also the the inherently superior top deck quality of his blue steel list, he managed to get to a point where he's just ripping better cards than James Burton was in the game. And you can see James Burton is like playing 1/2s and 2/2s and just horribly small characters that don't do anything while he's slamming Headless Horsemen and Hades and Namaris and Tinkerbells and so forth. Making the bigger point than just talking about Clarabelle though, I think the takeaway is being brave in making committal decisions that plays around your opponent's best stuff. Sure, it might look a bit silly based on our instinctive way that we want to play Lorcana for value and for trades and so forth, but if you know the matchup well and you know that your opponent has certain best cards that they can play on the following turn that would severely, skyrocket their chances of winning, it might be worth on your turn at least considering doing something that looks a little crazy if it might hamper your opponent's best plays. You never know, it might be in fact the best play that you got to make on that turn. Alright, so that's it for me for this week's, improving technical play. I'm so glad you stayed to the end if you're still watching. And if you do like this kind of content, again, please like and subscribe. See you around. Peace.